Multiplayer has been available on the unstable branch of Build 42 for a while now, and while it's been largely successful, it's certainly fair to say that there's also been a wide range of bugs causing problems for players, especially with the likes of animals and zombie combat mechanics. As of the 16th of February, you will be pleased to know that a new update to the unstable branch has arrived, and it's mostly focused around bug fixes, especially those that affect multiplayer. I'm about to go over everything you need to know about this update, focusing primarily on the things that will affect you most when playing Zomboid, while leaving out the minor stuff. So first and foremost, we're looking at fixes applied specifically to the multiplayer side of the game. So starting off with the big one, melee attacks should no longer pass through zombies in multiplayer, resulting in some frustrating deaths. I'd hazard a guess that we'll only really know if this one has been properly fixed once the wider player base gets a hold of this update, so go ahead and let me know down in the comments how you found combat so far following this patch. An exploit has been fixed that allowed players to carry far more than their inventory capacity should have allowed, so bad news for some, you won't be able to waddle home with a bunch of furniture items stuffed up your butt anymore. Composters have now been fixed. These were causing a whole bunch of errors to the point we had to ask players on our multiplayer servers to avoid them entirely due to performance issues that they caused. So I'm really glad to hear that this one has been sorted out. Right next to that comes a range of fixes for animals, including duplicates of chickens being made when attempting to place them in a hutch, issues obtaining animal info when checking zones, and a couple of problems with animal trailers. All to say that hopefully we should have a much smoother experience with animals in multiplayer from this point forward. However, I do think that there still needs to be a few adjustments to the mechanics surrounding animals for them to fit properly into a multiplayer setting. That's for another video though. Other notable items in this section include a fix to skill books immediately being consumed and marked as red when you had a lower skill level than the intended, a fix for characters' body heat never actually changing, a fix for gun magazines mysteriously vanishing when performing a reload, and finally a fix to a problem that would cause the player to be unable to enter vehicles. Various additional performance fixes have been made which should stop some of the issues multiplayer servers were having that caused them to become entirely unresponsive. So fingers crossed we'll be through the worst of it after this patch and multiplayer becomes a much smoother experience for everyone. Now I'm going to get into the new additions next. There's not really much to cover in this segment, but all the same there's one or two things worth knowing about. Before that though, if you're looking for somewhere to try Project Zomboid in a multiplayer setting, we do now have a public server alongside our server for my Patreon supporters. You can find a link to our Discord in the description, then just head to the PZ server announcements channel for the connection details. We've actually done a couple of special events on that server recently, like running a fully functional Gigamart and a Spiffos burger van, and we made videos from them too, so you can give those a watch if you're looking to find out what our server is like before jumping in on this brand new fresh wipe. Anyway, onto those new additions. Firstly, dental floss has been added as a new item, and while that might not initially seem like a big deal, the idea is that these can be used as an alternative to thread in many crafting recipes. I'm actually quite pleased to see this being implemented. I think it could bring a bit more value to medical locations and of course dentist surgeries. In a similar vein, fishing line can now be used in place of thread in certain recipes, such as for stitching and patching clothing items. Crucially, premium fishing line can now be used to replace aramid thread or sinew thread in craft recipes that would require them, giving us more options for some previously very difficult crafts. Sitting animations have been updated and several new items can now function as suitable seating, such as hay bales and toilets, so you can grab a few minutes of peace and read the last issue of the Kentucky Herald upon your porcelain throne. Various new item icons have been added to the game, along with updated logos, a change to some of the display names for firearms, and speaking of firearms, these have now been added to display counters, so they will no longer only spawn ammunition and attachments. Now, here's a big one, and I know this is going to make a lot of people, myself included, very happy. There have been several new additions to the user interface, specifically in regards to crafting and right-click actions. If you have all of the ingredients and tools for for a crafting recipe in your inventory, you can now right-click an item and the crafting recipe should appear in the right-click menu. For example, right-clicking a flint nodule while holding the proper tools will show you the recipe for napping a sharp flint flake. This also applies to actions like placing barricades on windows and doors, which I know is going to be music to a lot of players' ears. Hopefully, this is a good sign that the devs have heard the feedback coming from a lot of players regarding contextual right-click actions, and we'll get a nice middle ground between right-click menus and the crafting menu. A range of new sound effects have made it into this update for actions including the removal of stone or mineral deposits, smashing stone or metal, and preparing ingredients, to name just a few. There's also some new weapon sounds which I'll be looking forward to discovering next time I start a playthrough. While not technically new features, there's also a couple of extra things in this section that are really good to see, such as the game option to resume normal speed when timed actions complete being set to enabled by default, so you'll be able to skip through longer actions without risk of losing time to the fast forward button. The motion sickness trait has also been temporarily disabled, with the devs noting that this has been done pending a health balance overhaul, which is very interesting to see for a couple of reasons. The health system is honestly something that has needed a more detailed look for quite some time now, since we don't really engage with much of it at all, spare for bandaging wounds. So hopefully this is a sign that wider change is coming in that department, and even if not, the motion sickness trait was wildly overtuned anyway, and in its current state it was no good, so I'm glad to see it being worked on. Okay, so like I said, only a few things worth mentioning there. Next, we're on to the balancing changes that have been made in this update, and then we will wrap up with some of the wider fixes that aren't exclusive to multiplayer. First on our list in this section for balancing changes, zombie corpses are now dropped from the drag animation a bit faster, and the weight of skeletal corpses has been reduced, both for animals and zombies. There's been some fine-tuning with regards to vehicles and how they respond to ragdoll zombie collisions. Damage should now be applied correctly in all of these instances, both in single and multiplayer. There were some weird bugs occurring with vehicles and zombie corpses that would cause excessive damage in some cases, which is the last thing you want when you've spent time getting a vehicle up and running. Now, discomfort previously caused your character to become unhappy. This would most often happen from wearing too many protective clothing items at once. This has now been changed, and discomfort will instead cause stress to build. Now, they don't say this directly in the patch notes, but I would imagine this will thus cause a slower rate of unhappiness accumulation, allowing you to wear protective gear for longer and actively work against the negative impact with items that can reduce stress, like reading a magazine or smoking a cigarette, for example. Now, if you're someone that likes to play with zombies that can open doors, personally I find that absolutely terrifying, but you know, each to their own, you'll be pleased to know that you can now set a custom percentage of zombies that are able to open doors, much like you can with sprinters. You'll just need to change the cognition setting to random to be able to adjust this percentage. The construction of stone walls, door frames, and window frames will now require stone blocks instead of stones to construct them. I don't think many folks are using this right now anyway, because there's no real threats to safe houses that would warrant building tougher walls, but all the same, this will serve to lengthen the building process. When selected, multiple seed packets can now be read in sequence, reducing the amount of right-click actions considerably. Baking trays, baking pans, and roasting pans can no longer be used to collect small amounts of water, so you'll need to use cooking pots, bowls, or just build rain collectors from here on out. Finally, there's been a handful of ammunition and weaponry balancing in this update. The full list will be appearing on your screen now if you'd like to pause for a moment to give it a read, but I'd say the most notable ones in this list are the JS2000 now having a capacity of 1 less shell than before, the removal of 223 ammunition, with the MSR and varmint rifle now using 5.56 rounds instead, and finally the revolver now using 357 Magnum rounds, which is a new ammunition type that has been added in this update. So that's just about it for all of the balancing changes you need to know about, which finally brings us to the wider range of fixes applied to both single and multiplayer. As always, there is a fair few items in this list, so I won't be covering it all, but the full patch notes can be found linked in the description if you'd like to give them a more detailed read. For now, here's a couple of highlights. Ragdoll zombies will no longer ignore ground stomps from the player, which is going to make melee combat with ragdolls enabled much easier from this point forward. An instance that was causing vehicles and trailers to teleport to the northwest corner of a chunk has now been fixed. We're actually seeing a few cases of this on our multiplayer server where players reported their vehicles vanishing, so I'm glad to see this in the patch notes. Disassembling electronic furniture items in the player's inventory was previously giving less XP than when they were placed in the world. This issue has now been fixed and you should gain XP at the same rate regardless. You may have noticed recently the zombies were missing some animations when being shoved from behind, which might not seem like a huge deal but could serve to be a bit confusing in combat with larger groups. Thankfully, this bug has now been fixed in this update. I'd say that just about everything else in this section is pretty minor, so we'll wrap things up there for this update. But if you'd like to ask any questions in the comments, please do feel free. I'll do my best to respond to as many as I can. Quick thank you again to all of my Patreon supporters for backing the channel for as little as £3 a month. And if you'd like to try our multiplayer servers, you can find a link to my Discord down in the description. Just head to the PZ server announcements channel for the details. Thanks folks, and I'll see you all in the next one.